Yo, what's going on YouTube, and welcome to Scalebound. Now, while I was at Gamescom today, I was lucky enough to go behind closed doors and check out an extended Scalebound demo with none other than Hideki Kamiya. And in doing so, I was also able to find out a bit more about the game, so in this video, I basically want to tell you guys everything you need to know about Scalebound. If you guys do enjoy this video, then it'd be super awesome if you could hit that like button. And just before I get started, assuming you guys have seen the Scalebound trailer from the Xbox briefing, I want to know what you're most hyped about. Was it the combat? Was it the dragon? Was it the RPG elements? Let me know in the comments down below what you are most looking forward to in Scalebound. Now let's start right back at the beginning. Firstly, what is Scalebound? Well, the important distinction to make is that Scalebound, despite the fact that it's got a crazy action-oriented combat system, is an action RPG as opposed to a conventional action game. And what I mean by that is it was very clear, sort of speaking to Kamiya behind closed doors, that this is a different game to Bayonetta. You know, whereas something like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry is very action oriented, it's all about the combat. Whereas this Scalebound is a much wider game. While obviously yes, it does have an action style combat system, it is also at its heart an RPG. Which means the game doesn't just revolve around the combat, but it actually revolves around a much wider thing. So with that being said, if you're trying to sort of paint a picture of Scalebound or sort of try and get an understanding of what it's going to feel like, while it will still have the tactile kind of combat or the sort of great feedback that you come to expect from a Platinum game, it's not something you should really compare to something like Bayonetta, because as mentioned, Bayonetta or something like that is an action game, whereas this is an action RPG. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk characters. So, the main character you play as, his name is Drew, and your dragon friend is called Tevan. Now Drew basically comes from Earth, but he then gets transported to this land known as Draconis, and it's here where you meet your dragon friend. And for the observant ones out there that actually saw his right arm, you'll see that Drew's right arm is part dragon, and this basically represents the bond between him and Tevan. And throughout the game, while obviously what you saw in the kind of demo during the Xbox press conference was heavily combat focused, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, because throughout the game you have to work with your dragon companion to overcome a variety of different situations. As you saw during the demo, obviously when you fight like a massive opponent that Drew simply couldn't take on, then you work with your dragon companion in a sort of combat scenario, but when you work your way into dungeons, then there may be sort of puzzle components that you need to solve by taking advantage of both of your different abilities, both human and dragon. However, with that being said, it's worth noticing you can't actually control the dragon. You can give him suggestions, or you can give him kind of orders, so to speak, where you can basically say, you know, go there, attack this, you know, shoot a fireball here, and he'll then kind of move in and sort of do that wherever he can, but you can't physically control him. At all times, you are playing as Drew. And while we're talking about playing as Drew, the other thing worth mentioning is kind of when you're actually using him in combat, you are going to have to sort of establish a steady rotation for your weapons, because if you look in the bottom left hand corner, weapons actually have a durability meter, which means you can't just go around spamming the same weapon over and over again because the durability will wear down. So it's going to encourage you to sort of switch your weapons, just like you kind of come to expect from a sort of action-centric game, from something like Platinum, because, you know, there's so many crazy weapons, so many different things you can use, so many different things you can do, so the durability side of things really wants you to push that, and really kind of like play around with the combat. Now, moving away from Drew, speaking about the world itself, the world is fueled by this energy source known as Pulse. Now, Pulse basically lives and breathes or kind of runs through absolutely everything. It's a really powerful force, which has sort of like pushed the land apart, which also explains why there are kind of floating islands or these crazy bent trees, but it's also the primary power source for Drew and also Tevan. The kind of glowing parts you see on his horns, or the powers that allow him to use his dragon arm, all of that is fueled by a pulse. And obviously, while there's no points for guessing, when you saw during the demo that Drew actually transformed into kind of full dragon form, this is quite obviously a more powerful form. This also harnesses the pulse energy, but you can sort of see it like a superpower where for a limited period of time, you're doing much greater damage. Now when you're fighting enemies, depending on the way in which you defeat them, you can actually harvest them for gems. You may also remember from the demo, the point where Drew basically freezes the monster, smashes it up, and a load of these gems spawn. This is basically using the power of the pulse, you can turn defeated enemies into gems. And the gems are used for customization for different dragon parts and armor, which I'll get onto in a minute. However, it is worth noting that the only way you can actually harvest enemies for these gems is if they're actually left intact. Tevan, being a massive powerful dragon, typically upon defeating enemies, he will completely and utterly obliterate them. So obviously when you do that, there's no option for you to use your pulse to try and turn them into gems. So when you are fighting smaller monsters, it actually pays, as Drew, to fight them off yourself, because then you can harvest them, and as I said, those gems are extremely valuable because they'll be key in customizing your dragon. And speaking of customizing your dragon, let's talk about that, because that is something that was not shown during the Xbox briefing, but was shown behind closed doors, and it's so cool. Basically, you can customize your dragon in a number of different ways. On the base level, you can customize its skins, so you can have some completely different looking dragons, from sort of, like pale white ones with stripes, to sort of some like red fiery looking dragons, or like the ones that you see in the demo. And while we obviously haven't had a chance to see that, and I don't actually have any pictures of that, imagine the dragon that you see here with plated armor all over it. It looks really, really awesome, and in certain situations, while the games are clearly very different, the actual dragon with full plated armor had a certain sort of Horizon Zero Dawn look to it. On top of that, you can also customize different dragon parts, and you can also pick your element. So while during the Xbox demo we saw Tavan using fire, I also saw a demo where there is a dragon breathing ice. Now, customization aside, what else? Well, let's talk dungeons. That is something that, where the kind of Xbox demo ended, the one that you saw during the briefing, the behind closed doors demo actually picked up. We got a brief look at an initial part of the dungeon, and this actually leads up to the end of the trailer, where you see that big kind of multi-headed monster. Now, when you're in dungeons, this is where the sort of like dynamic between you and the dragon are going to come in, because there are parts where Tavan, being a massive dragon, he can't actually reach. So at times you will get separated from your dragon, which means you then need to fend for yourself completely as Drew, which obviously does have its added bonuses if you want to go and harvest crystals, but also it means in combat you can't always rely on Tavan to do your work for you. There'll also come parts where, say for example, you might encounter a door that's covered by some sort of, hefty big roots, and you simply, as Drew, just can't do anything about it. But you call Tavan in, he burns them down, and then the path is clear. So as you can see, within dungeons, while that example is a very sort of basic situation, you will have scenarios where you'll need to work with your dragon to try and overcome obstacles and try and sort of, complete different puzzles, and obviously advance through the game. Now another thing you might have noticed during the gameplay demo, right at the very end, is when the different players spawned in. There is 4-player co-op in Scalebound, and basically the way that it works is that when you build your dragon, when you kind of progress through the game, everything you've kind of done on the customization front, so for example if I had say like an ice dragon that's fully armoured, and you had say like a fire dragon that's sort of like got a different skin tone, when we kind of team up in game, you'll bring all of that with you. Which means there's obviously scope to have some great combinations, because you can actually work together to sort of, have different elemental bases covered, and obviously play to each other's strengths and weaknesses. You also got a glimpse from that part of the trailer at a variety of different weapons. Currently we've seen what looks like obviously the sword that Drew uses, which is like kind of single-handed sword. We've also seen a great sword, or like a big kind of buster sword, and also a spear. But that's obviously only a few weapons, there will obviously be plenty more. Because it is an action RPG and not just an action game, you'll obviously have kind of components that you are familiar with in RPGs. You have towns, you have NPCs that you can interact with, and obviously I would imagine, while I didn't see this during the behind closed doors demo, that towns will obviously be places where you can go to buy armor, to buy weapons, to buy different things like that to kind of tweak your customization. Lastly, I spoke a bit about customization for your dragon, but on the personal front, when you're talking about Drew, there will be some sort of very basic customization things you can do. I would imagine primarily in sort of armor and clothing, but as it stands, given that it is a story-based game and the story is built around this character, you can't actually make your own character. So Drew will be your main guy, whether you like it or not. And that, my friends, is pretty much it. I've got to say, when I first saw Scalebound in the Xbox briefing, while I was super excited, there were a couple of sort of things where I was a little bit on the fence, but having actually seen it behind closed doors, having seen it right in front of me, I was genuinely really impressed. It looks like a hell of a lot of fun, and the customization side of things means there is plenty of stuff to do. So, with that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. That's it from me. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to hit that like button. Super appreciated. And take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.